In the absence of noise, there is truth. When you cease the words, the calls, the messages, and the endless reaching outward, what remains is not emptiness. It is reflection. Human relationships are like still water. When disturbed by constant ripples, expectations, emotions, conversations, it becomes difficult to see clearly. But when the water becomes still, it mirrors exactly what stands above it. This is the function of silence, not to punish, not to provoke, but to reveal. When you remove your voice, your energy, your effort, something subtle begins to unfold. The other person, in the sudden quiet, is no longer distracted by your presence. Now, they must confront their own. To stop contacting a man is not merely an act of withdrawal. It is an invitation, not spoken, but silently extended. An invitation for him to look into the mirror of himself. In the absence of your presence, the space begins to ask him questions, not out loud, but inwardly. He begins to feel what was previously unseen. He begins to notice what had gone unnoticed. Often, in the noise of daily exchange, people become accustomed. They assume presence as permanent. But nothing in this world is permanent. Not the breath, not the sunrise, not the company of another. Only when something is removed does its presence begin to echo. This is the first teaching of silence. It reveals value through absence. The ancient Shaolin monks understood that in stillness, truth is revealed. Not in reaction, not in pursuit, but in presence. In silence, a man can no longer lean on the comfort of your consistency. He is faced with a vacuum. One that reflects his own thoughts, his intentions, his appreciation, or his indifference. Silence forces him to meet himself, and this can be deeply uncomfortable for many, because once the external validation stops, what remains is the raw truth of his character. You see, when you continuously reach out, you prevent a man from asking himself deeper questions. Did I value her presence? Why does the silence feel heavy? What was I giving, and what was I taking? What was her role in my inner balance? He cannot ask these questions if you keep filling the space with answers. Shaolin teachings often speak of Wu Wei, effortless action, or the art of allowing. Not every situation requires control. Not every moment needs intervention. When you remove your energy from someone, especially from a man who has grown dependent on it without acknowledgement, you return to the way of nature. Letting things be what they are, not what you force them to become. Silence is not passive. It is one of the most powerful teachers. In silence, you learn what is real, not what is spoken, but what is felt. It exposes intentions, not because you ask for them, but because they begin to reveal themselves when your energy no longer carries the weight of the connection. Some men in your silence will feel relief. That too is a lesson. Others will feel anxiety, confusion, regret, and these feelings are not yours to manage. They are his to observe. Because your silence has not caused them, it has only uncovered them. In a world addicted to noise, distraction, and constant validation, silence becomes an instrument of truth. A mirror that does not lie. In your absence, a man begins to face the consequences of his own energy. If his presence was genuine, consistent, and grounded, he will miss yours as something sacred. But if he was reliant on your chase, your emotional labor, your willingness to always be there, then your silence becomes unbearable. Not because he loves you, but because he depended on you to avoid facing himself. There is a kind of strength in those who can walk away without anger, without blame, without drama. A quiet retreat is often louder than 1,000 arguments, because it leaves no residue. It leaves space, and in that space, the truth has nowhere to hide. It is important to understand that silence is not a strategy, not a tactic. It is not used to manipulate. It is a return to your center. It is what you allow when you are no longer willing to participate in what dishonors your peace. When you stop contacting a man, not with bitterness, but with inner stillness, you are not turning your back, you are simply turning inward. Just like in meditation, the silence is not empty. It is full of answers, full of signals, full of mirrors. And just as the mountain does not chase the wind, so too should you not chase what is not grounded. If a man cannot see your value in your presence, let your silence be the mirror that reveals it. If he cannot hear your soul in your words, let him hear it in your absence. When you go silent, it is not the disappearance of noise. It is the beginning of listening. And those who are ready, those who are capable of depth, will hear the message. Not in what you said, but in what you chose not to say. In a world where constant contact has become the norm, distance feels like discomfort. And yet, only through distance does one begin to perceive clearly. The moment you create space between yourself and another, you also create an opportunity. Not a gap of punishment, not a wall of resentment, but an opening for awareness to arise. Just as silence can reveal the truth of sound, space reveals the truth of connection. People often believe that closeness guarantees understanding, but closeness without consciousness breeds blindness. When you are always present in someone's life, when you are always available, always responding, always showing up, your presence becomes invisible. The human mind begins to normalize what is constant. What is always there becomes what is taken for granted. Space breaks this pattern. It interrupts the automatic. It awakens the dormant part of the other person's mind that had stopped observing you. Space is not absence. It is presence in a different form. It is the deliberate act of stepping back, not out of anger or withdrawal, but out of clarity. The moment you stop filling the space between you and another with noise, effort, or attachment, you allow truth to surface, not just in them, but in yourself. Shaolin teachings speak often of the breath. Inhale, exhale, expansion, contraction. It is not only the breath that follows this rhythm. Relationships too follow this ancient flow. The constant inhaling of attention must be balanced by the exhale of space. Without the pause, even breath becomes suffocation. And without space in a connection, the bond becomes dependency. In space, the question is finally allowed to rise. What is really here? A man, when given space, is no longer reacting to you. He begins reacting to himself. There are no more messages to answer, no presence to depend on, no attention to absorb unconsciously. What remains is the awareness of what you were giving. And in this space, he is no longer distracted by your energy. He must rely on his own. And that moment is critical. If what he felt was genuine, he will become aware of its depth. If what he felt was surface, level, he will become aware of its emptiness. Space does not create or destroy emotion, it reveals it. It shows what is already there. But what space always does is wake people up. Just as sleep refreshes the body, space refreshes perception. And perception is the seed of all realization. In a monastery, monks rise before the sun not just to begin the day, but to begin the observation. In that early stillness, where the world has not yet begun its noise, awareness deepens. One sees the breath, the mind, the habits. Similarly, in the early stillness of space in a relationship, when everything becomes quiet, the subtle becomes visible. What was ignored becomes important. What was assumed becomes uncertain. What was overlooked becomes clear. Many people fear creating space. They worry the other person will forget, replace, or move on. But this fear is the echo of attachment, not awareness. Because if someone forgets you in your silence, they were never truly present when you were speaking. And if someone replaces you in your absence, they never recognized your value in your presence. Space doesn't create separation. It reveals where the connection truly stands. When you step back, you are not disappearing. You are becoming visible in a new way. You are no longer filling the space with reminders of your worth. You are allowing the other person to remember it, if they are capable of remembering. Some will not. But that too is awareness. That too is part of the truth space is trying to show. Consider the seasons. Spring is only appreciated after winter. Light is valued only after darkness. In the same way, your space becomes the contrast that brings awareness to your light. Without contrast, nothing is defined. Without space, no true value is measured. A painting is only beautiful because it has a frame. A note is only powerful because of the silence before and after it. It is not always easy to step back, especially when emotions are involved, especially when you care, but it is in stepping back that you reclaim the clarity of your vision. You are no longer acting from the need to be seen, heard, or chosen. You are choosing to observe. Observation is power. It allows you to see not what you hope for, but what is. And this seeing is the foundation of wisdom. Not every man will understand the language of space. Some will interpret it as indifference, others as rejection. But this misunderstanding is also a revelation. It shows their relationship to stillness. It shows their dependence on constant stimulation. A man who has never learned to sit with himself will struggle to understand the quiet language of space. But a man who is in tune with his own depth will feel your space as presence, not absence. He will not panic. He will reflect. This is why space is not empty. It is a container of awareness. It holds the energy of everything you were giving without adding anything new. It allows a man to measure his own inner world, Instead of reacting to yours, it teaches him how to move without your prompting. It invites him to decide, not out of pressure, but out of recognition. When you are always reaching out, you interrupt his ability to reach in, and when you constantly fill the space, he never learns how to stand in it. But when you stop, when you pause, when you breathe and step back, the echo begins, the silence starts to speak, the space starts to form shape, not in noise, not in effort. But in awareness, there is a law in nature that cannot be bypassed. What you give, you must first possess. And when you give without limit, when you extend beyond your center without awareness, there will come a time when you feel the imbalance. A time when your hands feel empty, even though your heart once overflowed. This is not because what you gave was wrong, but because what you gave was not returned. Not in the form of gratitude, presence, effort, or attention. In such moments, it is not the world that is unjust. It is you who must return to the source. You must reclaim what has been scattered, spent, or forgotten. This is the path of internal realignment, the path where energy returns to you. In relationships, especially those where your giving has been constant, unconscious, and unquestioned, your energy begins to leak. It flows outward into messages, calls, emotional labor, unspoken hope, and silent sacrifices. And while it may seem noble, even necessary, to keep giving in the name of love or connection, there is a wisdom deeper than generosity. That wisdom says, anything that leaves you must be connected to a root. If the root is not strong, the branch cannot hold fruit. There is a point in every journey of connection where one must pause. Not to retreat, but to remember. To remember the self as the source. To understand that giving is only pure when it comes from fullness, not from depletion. Many give in hopes of being seen. Many offer themselves in fragments, thinking they will be made whole in return. But the truth is simple and often difficult to accept. The energy flows in cycles. If the cycle is not closed, the flow becomes loss. When your energy is always going outward and nothing returns, that is not love, it is erosion. When you stop reaching, something very subtle begins to happen. Your body feels the stillness first, the absence of striving, the cooling of urgency. Then the mind begins to follow. It stops scanning for signs, waiting for replies, stretching itself thin across the emotional distance between you and another. In that stillness, your awareness sharpens. And finally, your spirit begins to gather itself. Like scattered water returning to the river, your energy begins to return home. In the teachings of the Shaolin tradition, it is said, where the mind goes, energy follows. But what is often forgotten is the second part. Where the energy settles, the spirit rises. You begin to rise only when your energy is no longer chasing. You begin to strengthen only when your life force is not scattered across places that do not nourish it. Energy does not belong to another. Even when it is given, it carries your signature. It leaves your body carrying your intention. If that intention is not met with presence or reciprocity, the energy fades into the void. But if you become still and you stop sending it outward unconsciously, that same energy begins to pool within you again. You become fuller not because the world has changed, but because you have stopped leaking yourself into it without measure. A man who has become used to receiving your energy without effort will notice this change. Not always immediately, but inevitably. He may not know what shifted, but he will feel it. The absence of attention is louder than words. The silence of withdrawal is heavier than conversation. But this shift is not about him. It is about balance. It is about the recognition that your life is not a well to be drawn from endlessly by those who do not replenish it. Energy, like breath, is sacred. Inhale, exhale, give, receive. There must be rhythm. But when you give and give, when your emotional lungs are only exhaling, exhaustion becomes your natural state. And from that state, clarity cannot grow. Joy cannot grow. Awareness cannot survive. When you stop contacting, when you stop chasing, when you stop overextending, something ancient begins to awaken inside you. It is the memory of self. The quiet presence within you that does not beg, does not grasp, does not perform. It simply is. And from this center, all things arise. From this stillness, all truth becomes visible. You begin to realize how often your energy was not honored, how often it was expected, not appreciated. You begin to see how much of your worth was placed in how someone else responded to your efforts. And slowly, this illusion fades. The energy you once spent in seeking validation now begins to solidify into self-awareness. You become the observer rather than the participant. You watch without effort. You feel without reacting. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is refinement. It is the clarity that comes from being full again. It is the moment when you begin to feel your own power, not in dominance, not in control, but in sovereignty. You are no longer seeking to be chosen. You are choosing to be aligned. And from that alignment, your energy becomes magnetic. Not because you are trying, but because you are being. And being is the highest form of power. A tree does not chase the wind. A mountain does not move to be seen. They remain in their form, and all things come to recognize them. You too were never meant to bend endlessly just to be acknowledged. When you stop pouring out your energy toward those who have not earned it, that energy begins to work for you. It restores your clarity. It sharpens your perception. It deepens your connection to the present moment. Human nature is drawn toward comfort. It seeks the familiar, the predictable, the effortless. In relationships, people often assume that what is always available will remain so. When presence becomes predictable, appreciation fades, but it is not appreciation that disappears. It is attention that drifts, and only discomfort can summon it back. When something once certain becomes absent, the mind begins to question what the heart once ignored. This is the function of discomfort, to bring value back into view. Comfort hides truth. It creates illusion. It teaches the mind to expect without effort, to assume without gratitude. It numbs the senses to what once felt rare. In this state, even the most meaningful gestures can be overlooked. Words of care become routine. The depth of someone's presence becomes weightless. What once felt grounding becomes invisible. And so, the teachings of Shaolin emphasize this. Awareness is sharpened not through comfort, but through contrast. And nothing creates contrast like discomfort. When you remove your energy from a man who has grown used to it, something unspoken begins to stir. At first, it feels like confusion. Why has the rhythm changed? Where did the familiar go? He may not know the answer immediately, because the human mind, conditioned to comfort, does not welcome disruption. But discomfort is not destruction. It is the teacher that makes you pay attention again. What is easily available is seldom valued deeply. The water that flows endlessly is taken for granted until the stream dries. The light that fills every room is ignored until a single shadow falls. So too with presence. So too with effort. When a man has been met with your words, your thoughts, your warmth, without needing to ask, without needing to reflect, it becomes part of the background, a constant, an expectation. But when you stop, when the current halts, the comfort ends. And with that ending, a lesson begins. The lesson is subtle. It does not shout. It whispers through discomfort. It speaks through absence. And it asks a silent question. What was I given that I failed to recognize? Not all will hear the question. Some will distract themselves. Some will run toward new noise. But the man who is capable of growth will sit with the discomfort. And in that stillness, the value begins to reveal itself. Shaolin monks are taught to endure discomfort not for the sake of suffering, but for the sake of perception. When you remove ease, the mind becomes alert. You notice the body. You observe the breath. You hear the inner dialogue that comfort drowned out. In this way, discomfort becomes a gate, a passage into greater clarity. In relationships, it serves the same purpose. When someone no longer feels the daily warmth of your energy, the emotional silence invites reflection. And in that reflection, your true worth begins to take form. People do not value the sun until the clouds arrive. They do not feel the depth of peace until they've experienced unrest. In the same way, your consistency is not measured in your presence. It is measured in its interruption. What you offered without question becomes precious when it's no longer guaranteed. Not because you took something away, but because what you gave was never fully seen until it stopped. Discomfort is uncomfortable precisely because it touches the truth. It removes the cushion and forces one to sit on the stone. It is in that place that a man begins to remember. He remembers the small details, the way you listened without judgment, the steadiness of your energy, the way your presence never demanded, only supported. He remembers, not because you told him again, but because your absence spoke louder than repetition. There is a tendency to believe that value must be proven, that one must keep showing, keep giving, keep reminding. But true value does not speak constantly. It lets absence do the talking. The mountain does not follow those who leave it. Yet when they walk away and the ground becomes unstable, they remember the stillness of the peak. They remember its presence, even in silence. The Shaolin path teaches that suffering without awareness is wasted, but suffering with awareness is transformation. Similarly, discomfort without reflection becomes bitterness or blame, but discomfort with stillness, with humility, becomes a mirror. A man, when faced with the discomfort of your absence, is being invited to see not only you, but himself. How did he show up? What did he offer in return? What did he assume would never leave? This is not about punishment. It is not about teaching someone a lesson through force. It is about allowing natural consequences to unfold. When you stop pouring yourself into someone who expects you to keep flowing without question, there will be discomfort. But that discomfort is not cruelty. It is balance returning. People change not because they are told to, but because they are made to feel something they cannot ignore. Words can be denied. Logic can be argued. But the ache of absence cannot be escaped. It lingers. It hums in the quiet. It appears in unexpected moments. A morning with no message, an evening without your voice, a problem faced alone. That ache is awareness being born. And in this awareness, value re-emerges. Not the kind based on memory alone, but the kind rooted in felt experience. In realizing what was once ignored, a man begins to see clearly. Not because you demanded it, but because life in its wisdom brought discomfort to the surface. It took away the convenience so that the essence could be seen. When movement ceases, clarity begins. The mind that is constantly stimulated, constantly seeking, constantly reacting, is too preoccupied to remember what matters. But when stillness is introduced, it disrupts the cycle. It pulls the mind out of the trance of routine and forces it to sit. In that sitting, something powerful stirs. Not forward motion, not planning, not desire, but memory. The ancient kind. The kind that does not arise through thinking, but through feeling. This is the function of stillness. It does not create memory. It calls it back. A man may not remember the details of what you said, or the logic of your explanations. He may forget how many times you were there, how many ways you showed up, how many sacrifices you made in silence. But what he cannot forget, what no amount of distraction can erase, is how your presence made him feel. And in the noise of life, that feeling becomes buried. In the constant motion, it fades beneath surface level interactions. But once stillness arrives uninvited and unfamiliar, that memory begins to rise. It is easy to overlook presence when it is constant. Like a background melody, it becomes a part of the atmosphere. But when the music stops, the silence is deafening. That silence does not speak of punishment. It speaks of absence. It speaks of what is missing. And what is missing reminds him of what was once always there. This is how memory is activated. Not through reminders, but through stillness. In the teachings of internal cultivation, we are taught that the body holds memory deeper than the mind. The mind forgets. It edits, it filters, it distorts. But the body remembers what brought it peace. The heart remembers what made it feel safe. The nervous system remembers what made it feel seen. Stillness brings all of this to the surface because when the noise stops, the body is finally able to listen. When you remove your voice, your energy, your attention from a man who had grown used to it, the immediate reaction may be confusion. But confusion is only the first layer. Beneath it is reflection. Beneath reflection is emotion. And buried within emotion is memory. Not memory as a list of events, but memory as a vibration. He may not remember the timeline, but he remembers how you softened the weight of his day. He remembers how your presence calmed storms he never spoke about. He remembers the steadiness, the quiet strength, the emotional depth that never asked for praise. These realizations do not occur in conversation. They are not accessed when the mind is in defense. They are only revealed when life becomes quiet enough to listen inwardly. And that listening requires stillness. The Shaolin path often begins with breathwork, not to control the air, but to return to presence. The breath becomes the doorway to the moment, and the moment becomes the mirror. When distractions are removed, when the external world fades, the internal begins to speak. And for a man who has lost sight of what you brought into his life, stillness becomes the only teacher left. Because it is the one voice he cannot argue with. It does not confront, it reflects. Stillness has a way of revealing contrast. It shows what was once ignored through the absence of stimulation. The man who once felt surrounded by your energy, by your care, by your effort, now finds himself in emotional silence. There is no more reaching, no more reminders. And at first, he may interpret this as distance. But in time, if he has any depth, he will understand. It is not distance, it is space. And in space, memory begins to unfold. The body has its own language. The heart speaks through sensation. The nervous system records every act of care. These records are silent when the body is busy. But in stillness, they rise like echoes. There are no new voices to cover them, no distractions to push them away. And so the man begins to feel you, not in your presence, but in your absence. And what he feels are fragments returning. The warmth, the patience, the feeling of being emotionally met without judgment. All of these impressions rise, not because you forced him to remember, but because stillness gave him no other choice. There is a teaching in the martial disciplines that says, the sword that is never sheathed grows dull. The same is true with emotional energy. When it is always used, always given, always assumed, it becomes background noise. But when it is withdrawn, when it is returned to its scabbard, its sharpness becomes known again. Your stillness is not silence. It is presence without expression. It is energy no longer spent outward, but gathered inward. And that energy in its quiet speaks louder than words. Stillness does not chase answers. It allows them to appear. It does not demand recognition. It lets recognition arise naturally when the mind becomes still enough to see what was always there. A man cannot understand what your presence truly meant until he is left alone with the absence of it. He cannot grasp what he never examined. But when everything goes quiet, when the messages stop, the rhythm breaks, and the atmosphere changes, he is left to face what remains. And what remains is memory. Not all men will respond to this. Some will move away from the discomfort stillness brings. They will find new stimulation, new distraction to keep memory suppressed. But others, the ones who are capable of depth, will sit with the discomfort long enough to feel the truth beneath it. And in that stillness, the feeling of you will return, not as an idea, not as a role, but as an experience. One that does not fade even when words are gone. Stillness becomes the field where memory is sown. And in that field, the forgotten is remembered, the overlooked is seen, the undervalued becomes sacred. Not because you asked to be remembered, but because your silence gave memory the space to speak. There is power in action. But there is greater power in restraint. In the moment of provocation, the ability to remain still is not weakness. It is control. It is awareness. Most people spend their lives reacting. They react to what is said, what is done, what is withheld, what is misunderstood. They become puppets of their surroundings, slaves to emotion, pulled by every impulse as if they have no choice. But the ancient teachings are clear. Choice begins where reaction ends, and the one who is able to choose their response is already ahead of the one who cannot. To master the self is not to suppress what you feel. It is to become so intimate with what you feel that it no longer owns you. You know it, you see it rise, you feel the wave, but you do not drown in it. You do not hand over your peace in exchange for a moment of release. This is the art of inner strength. The discipline of response over reaction. When someone distances themselves from you, when someone ignores you, when someone chooses silence, inconsistency, or manipulation, the instinct is to respond. Quickly, emotionally, to speak, to explain, to argue, to plead. The nervous system is wired to close gaps and resolve discomfort. But resolution built on reaction is never real. It is noise pretending to be peace. The real peace comes from stillness, the kind that observes but does not obey emotion, the kind that watches the rise of anger or pain but does not become it. In Shaolin practice, monks are not taught to fight the enemy first. They are taught to defeat the enemy within, the impatience, the frustration, the pride, the need to be right, the need to be heard, the belief that silence must be filled, the belief that action must always follow feeling. When those impulses are mastered, the outer conflict no longer holds power. This is what self-mastery teaches, that the battle is never truly outside of you. In relationships, but this becomes even more essential. When emotions are strong, when attachment is deep, and when expectations are unmet, the temptation to respond becomes overwhelming. But a response made from emotional urgency lacks alignment. It seeks to control, not to understand. And what it often creates is more distance, not connection. But when you choose not to respond, not out of punishment, but out of presence, you create space for clarity to emerge. You begin to see what is actually happening, not just what you fear is happening. You see the pattern. You see your own triggers. You see the energy behind the situation. Most importantly, you see your power. The power to respond when it serves you, not when you are controlled by the need to react. A man who expects your reaction is often playing a silent game. He sends signals, he tests, he withdraws, he waits, and if you respond in the way he expects, the pattern continues. He holds the power, you hold the emotional burden. But when you do not respond, when you choose stillness, you disrupt the pattern. You return the energy to yourself. You become unavailable for emotional manipulation. You step outside the story and become the observer. And this is the role of the master, not to win battles, but to see them clearly enough that they do not require engagement. Every time you choose not to respond out of emotional reflex, you strengthen the muscle of awareness. You build inner structure. You teach your nervous system that discomfort does not require reaction. You train the body and mind to hold stillness like a mountain. And in doing so, you rise above the situation rather than sink into it. This kind of mastery does not shout. It does not demand. It does not prove. It is quiet. It is invisible to those who look only at the surface. But it is deeply felt. A man who once expected you to beg, explain, chase, or justify will feel the absence of your reaction more than the presence of your words. He may not understand it, but he will feel the shift. The energy that once flowed toward him now remains with you. An energy that is held rather than spilled becomes power. Stillness in the face of emotional provocation is not coldness. It is warmth preserved. It is energy not wasted. It is dignity maintained. You do not betray yourself just to be seen or heard. You breathe, you observe, and from that space, if a response is still needed, it will come, not from fear, but from wisdom. There is a teaching in Zen that says, the arrow that hits the target does not rush. In the same way, your words, your decisions, your energy, when guided by stillness, carry more weight than 1,000 reactions. They are precise. They are grounded. They do not tremble, because they are not born of need. They are born of choice. In the monastery, even a simple task, like serving tea or walking across the courtyard, is done with mindfulness. Why? Because how you do anything reveals who you are in that moment. If your response to discomfort is instant and emotional, it is not aligned with mastery. But if you can feel everything and still remain centered, you are walking the true path. Self-mastery is not about being unaffected. It is about being aware of your inner landscape while not letting it dictate your outward movement. You become the space through which emotion flows, but does not dominate. You create pause. You create choice. You create sovereignty. And in that sovereignty, you are no longer pulled, no longer pushed, no longer played by external forces.